the American people confront as it relates to our continued effort to lower costs for everyday Americans, to make sure we give every single American an opportunity to experience the great American dream, have a pathway toward opportunity and prosperity, and also defend the freedoms that have long been assumed to be permanent here in America, but which a radical right-wing Supreme Court majority has either taken away in the form of the freedom of women to make their own reproductive health care decisions, or is on the verge of taking away as it relates to family planning and the right to marry who you want to marry. So we have two distinguished members who are with us today who will speak about those legislative efforts, of course, along with our distinguished vice chair. This week, today, in fact, several appropriations bills will be on the floor. And those bills are not just pro forma pieces of legislation that we have to do as members of Congress as a matter of course. House Democrats, through the appropriations bills, are investing in the creation and preservation of affordable housing, investing in transportation, making sure that the American people can go to or from work, back and forth to visit loved ones, family members, enjoy themselves, visit their houses of worship. House Democrats are investing in transportation. We're investing in the health and well-being of women, infants, and children, and so many other areas. And we expect, unfortunately, that the party of no, the Republicans, the other side of the aisle, who never met a visionary idea that they like, is going to vote no. That's a shame. And now yield to our distinguished Vice Chair, Pete Aguilar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate our colleagues joining us here today to talk about important pieces of legislation that we plan to move off the House floor this week. This week on Thursday, we'll also have our next January 6th hearing. So far, we've detailed the administration's ties to extremism, the pressure campaign that the former president put on his own vice president, as well as the Department of Justice. We've talked about the doomed litigation strategy that was built on a lie. And what we will lay out on Thursday is what was happening during those 187 minutes in the White House. And I think it's important to just step back and talk about how we got here. On November 9th, 2020, the Washington Post ran a story with the headline, "Top Republicans Back Trump's Efforts to Challenge Election Results." The story continued to detail an anonymous quote that will live in infamy. And it read, quote, "What is the downside for humoring him, Donald Trump, for this little bit of time? No one seriously thinks the results will change," said one senior Republican official. He went golfing this weekend. It's not like he's plotting how to prevent Joe Biden from taking power on January 20th. He's tweeting about filing some lawsuits. Those lawsuits will fail. Then he'll tweet some more about how the election was stolen, and then he'll leave. How many people followed the guidance of that letter? Humoring him every step of the way. So we'll continue to detail, specifically this hearing, that failed leadership. How Donald Trump failed to take that oath seriously. And at any point, he could have walked to the press room a couple feet away and called off the rioters. The rioters that he knew were armed, that he knew were angry, and yet he pointed at the Capitol 4 times and told them to march. Those 187 minutes are much more than humoring him. The consequences we're still dealing with today. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague and friend, Representative Kathy Manning.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Good morning, everyone. I'm Congresswoman Kathy Manning. I proudly represent North Carolina's 6th Congressional District. I'm here today to tell you about my bill, the Right to Contraception Act, which the House will be voting on this Thursday. This critical legislation codifies the right to birth control into federal law, ensuring that individuals have a right to obtain contraception services and healthcare providers have a right to provide contraception services to their patients. My bill protects the full range of contraceptive methods, devices, and medications, including birth control pills, IUDs, and emergency contraceptives like Plan B. Birth control is critically important to women's health, equality, and economic and educational opportunities. It empowers people to be in control of their own bodies, families, and futures. And almost all women use birth control at some point in their lifetimes. However, the far right is attacking contraceptive rights. These attacks aren't new. Over the past decade, Republican-controlled states like Mississippi, Texas, Louisiana, Idaho, Arizona, Missouri, and others have attempted to restrict access to birth control. Last month, Justice Clarence Thomas specifically called for the reconsideration of the right to contraception in his concurring opinion in Dobbs. Make no mistake, Republicans have heard Justice Thomas's rallying call to escalate attacks on reproductive rights. Extreme politicians are pushing fake science, falsely conflating abortion with contraception, and stigmatizing and restricting essential reproductive health care. My bill, the Right to Contraception Act, will put a stop to these violations of Americans' reproductive freedom by working proactively to safeguard birth control. Let me be clear. We are working to protect women's right to control their lives. Our opponents are working to take women's rights away. I look forward to passing this bill to protect women's rights across this country. And I yield to Representative David Cicilline. I yield to my friend and colleague, Representative David Cicilline. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman Manning. Good morning. I'm delighted to be here at the invitation of our caucus chair and vice chair, and to say first that I'm proud that the Democratic Party and the Democratic Caucus is responding swiftly to the sort of anti-freedom, far extreme Supreme Court that is committed to really taking away freedoms that Americans have enjoyed for a very long time. Access to abortion care, access to contraceptions, and even access to marriage, the institution of marriage and marriage equality. And so we don't have to wonder if that's the Supreme Court's plan, because we saw in Justice Thomas's concurrence specific reference to Obergefell and an urging of the court to revisit the substantive due process cases that recognize those freedoms, those rights for all Americans. So later today, the House will vote on H.R. 8404, the Respect for Marriage Act. These are economic issues because, as in family planning, a marriage status confers all kinds of economic benefits in tax policy, in buying insurance, and securing a mortgage. So these are important to LGBTQ families. People build their lives, married families build their lives together, knowing that the government will respect and recognize their marriages. However, same-sex couples all across this country are worried about the future of their marriages because of the Supreme Court's decision in Dobbs, and in particular, Justice Thomas's alarming and extreme concurrence where he calls for the court to revisit seminal substantive due process cases, and specifically, as I said, calls out Obergefell. The Respect for Marriage Act will create stability and certainty for families worried about what the future may bring. Specifically, the bill does three things. It's a very simple bill. It corrects Congress's grievous mistake by repealing the so-called Defense of Marriage Act that the court essentially ruled unconstitutional, when it recognized marriage equality, something we have a responsibility to do. When something's unconstitutional, we should remove it from our books. And it has to be repealed, and that's the first thing that the Respect for Marriage Act does. The second is the bill establishes a definition of marriage in federal law to ensure that for federal purposes, valid marriages, including same-sex marriages, have equal status to any other valid marriage. So it recognizes a definition of marriage for federal purposes. And finally, the bill prohibits any person acting under color of state law from failing to give full effect to an out-of-state marriage based on sex, race, ethnicity, or national origin of the individuals involved in the marriage. And it provides the Attorney General of the United States with the authority to pursue enforcement, and it creates a private right of action for any individual harmed by these actions. And this is really existing law. You know, if you're married in one state, it's recognized in all the other states. This will ensure that the marriage and access to marriage is not denied based on sexual orientation, race, gender, ethnicity, and it will ensure that if you are married in a state lawfully, it must be recognized by the remaining jurisdictions. And by passing this law, we will make certain that those Americans who have settled their lives and ordered their families around a recognition of marriage equality will continue to be ensured that those marriages will be respected. I want to thank Chairman Nadler of the Judiciary Committee, Chairman Jeffries, the chair of our caucus, who were instrumental in crafting this bill, and look forward to its swift passage in the House. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Cicilline, for your leadership in a whole host of areas, including, of course, antitrust reform, in particular as it relates to the Respect for Marriage Act. Thank you, Representative Manning, for your tremendous leadership in defending the right to contraception.
I have two questions. The first for Vice Chair Aguilar, if you could talk a little bit about the impact of the former president now saying that he may announce his run for re-election at some point in a matter of weeks, if that impacts the work of your committee. And then the second question that I have is for both of you. You referenced that gay marriage is an economics issue. Abortion is as well. How are Democrats going to better tailor their messaging to making clear that these two issues are actually economic issues, especially given the midterms? Economics is a top concern for voters.
Yield to Pete first.
My answer is quick. I want my colleagues to have the time that they need to answer that. The answer is no. The committee, can't weigh what the former president's political calendar may or may not be. Our responsibility is to seek the truth and to chase the facts and to make sure we tell the full and complete story about January 6th.
Just one follow-up, though. I know that the chairman yesterday said to me that you guys were going to do a scaled-back version of the final report and then a final report in the fall. Are you guys taking the midterms into consideration at all in terms of when you release those things?
No, we're operating under the guidance that House Resolution 503 gave us, which was, within this time frame, within this congressional calendar, we're gonna sprint through the tape and make sure that we do all of the work, and that means eventually we will put out a report. There may be pieces and components that become public before the final report, but we haven't set to a specific timeline and calendar. And as the vice chair and chair have mentioned, we're still continuing to gather evidence, and that's why we can't commit to a final hearing at this point either, because evidence continues to come in. We have a responsibility to the investigation and to make sure that we are as thorough and complete as possible before the final report comes out. Thank you.
And I would start by saying, the Democrats have worked very hard to respond to both a serious public health crisis, the pandemic, as well as the economic devastation that flowed from that. And that ranged in everything we did in the American Rescue Plan and the President's Infrastructure Plan. All those things addressed the economic challenges that families are facing and provided help with child care and direct financial, survival checks to families, helps to small businesses. So a lot of the work we've done has really responded to the economic crisis that followed from the pandemic. It's important to note almost no Republicans supported any of those efforts to help working families and small businesses in this country navigate through this deadly pandemic. And so that's the first thing. We're going to continue to repeat that message of the work we've done to help people survive, to keep their jobs, to keep their small businesses open. But it's also important that people understand there's one party that's fighting hard to protect democracy and freedom in this country, and there's another party that is not. The extraordinary work of the January 6th Commission is an example of that. Literally, people continuing to promote the big lie and undermining the effort to get to the truth and hold people accountable. But also the freedoms that we all take for granted. The freedom to marry, the freedom to access contraceptive, the freedom to access full reproductive health care, including abortion services. Those are under attack. And we are going to be the party that's fighting to protect freedom and the freedoms that the American people enjoy today. And there's another group of people that are trying to take those freedoms away, or at the very least, are unwilling to stand up to protect those freedoms. And you're going to see that in a vote today. You're going to see it in a vote on contraception. You saw it already on the Women's Health Protection Act. So that's an important part of the message we're also getting communicate. We're addressing the economic issues. We're also addressing protecting these freedoms. And finally, all of these issues are connected. It matters a lot to families if people have a marriage that is recognized under law. You get lower insurance rates. You get tax benefits. You get access to mortgages. There's lots of benefits. We have lots of policies that favor marriage. And if you deny a whole group of people access to that institution, they're going to face higher costs. This is an economic issue. You don't have to convince people who are members of the LGBTQ community there are financial implications to being married. We know that, and I think the community is going to see there is one group of legislators that are fighting hard to respect and protect their marriage, and there's another group of people who are not willing to do that.
When it comes to birth control and the economic impact of having an unwanted pregnancy, I think women all across the country, no matter where they live, no matter who they are, no matter who they voted for, they understand the economic burden of having an unwanted pregnancy. It can interrupt their education. It can interrupt their ability to perform their job. It can result in added family members that they have to figure out how to support. So I think once the American public understands that extreme Republicans are trying to take away their right to use birth control, the argument will make itself.
So last week, President Biden announced that he would be taking steps to take executive action on climate change. Are there any other areas that you want to see the president take action on, and how far do you want him to use his limits of executive authority, given some of the constitutional limits that he does have, as some of these issues remain in stalemate over here?
Well, there are big challenges that the American people face, and we continue to address those challenges, as David indicated, both in terms of crushing the virus, the public health pandemic that we are continuing to fight our way through, but we've made tremendous progress leading with the American Rescue Plan. The economic challenges that the American people confront in terms of rising inflation and the other expenses. We're going to continue to work to lower costs and to make sure that we stand up our manufacturing base here in America, particularly as it relates to high-tech manufacturing and chips. That's legislative work that we continue. And of course, in defense of freedom, as Representative Manning and Representative Cicilline have indicated, we're leading the charge in that regard, and in keeping the American people safe from the rising epidemic of gun violence. So there's a very active legislative agenda. President Biden is very engaged in that effort, both in the House and the Senate. In terms of whatever executive actions they may feel is necessary to take, we'll address that as it comes down.
Mr. Chairman.
Second.
It was about a year ago that you all embarked here on the House side to put together Build Back Better. You all described that whole process as one that was, family growing pains at times. We saw it get done, but we've also seen it dramatically scaled back, including what we saw last week with Manchin saying, it's just going to be prescription drugs, it looks like, also expanding the ACA subsidies. And similar things that happened on the USICA, the CHIPS bill. You all trying to beef it up, and it just gets whittled down. And I'm curious how you all, leaders, are trying to make sure that a lot of House Democrats, of course, feel frustrated that that's happened, seeing a lot of things undercut in those ways. How are you all trying to make sure that the perfect isn't the enemy of the good, with some people who really may want to vote against these bills because it's not what they initially wanted?
Well, I'll let the other members address it as well, but I'll just simply say, from my standpoint, I think the overwhelming majority of members of the House Democratic Caucus have one standard. It's a meaningfulness standard. will the legislation that comes before us meaningfully improve the lives of the American people, their health, their safety, their economic well-being? And if in fact the legislation does that, it will have 218 votes. And with respect to whatever comes out of the Senate, in terms of the legislation formerly known as Build Back Better, whatever that legislation looks like, if it in fact lowers healthcare costs that may skyrocket if we don't act in terms of subsidies for the Affordable Care Act, if in fact it works to drive down the high price of life-saving prescription drugs, which affects all Americans, in part by giving the federal government the ability to use its bulk price purchasing power to negotiate lower prices for everyday Americans, I would expect that's legislation that will get the support of the House Democratic Caucus because it will meaningfully improve lives. Anybody else? Okay. Go back to this side. Yeah.
How confident are you that the CHIPS bill can pass the House before you leave at the end of next week? And do House Democrats regret spending 8 months to come up with their own bill that they knew wasn't going to pass muster in the Senate?
Yeah, you know, we'll see what the final product is in terms of the ongoing conference committee efforts, which are proceeding in good faith. I do think it's important for us to act with respect to bringing back domestic manufacturing in terms of semiconductors and chips. Is very important in the context of the supply chain disruptions that we have been experiencing since the onset of the pandemic, as well as in terms of bringing back good-paying manufacturing jobs to the United States of America, all over, but particularly the heartland. Again, we'll see what the final product is. If it substantially moves the ball forward for the American people, I expect that it will have support here in the House of Representatives, something to build upon, and if there's additional work to be done, we'll live to fight another day, as always.
No, I'll just echo. You folks asked a similar question when gun violence prevention was something that we wanted to address, and the meaningfulness standard that the chairman mentioned was also applicable. Will it save lives? Will it be meaningful? Will it help our communities? Will it save lives? That's the standard by which, and that's why I'm proud to stand with the House Democratic Caucus as we have these discussions. That doesn't mean to legislate is to be frustrated at times, and maybe that's what you want us to say, and I'm fine saying that. We should be frustrated at times if what we want to enact is more than what gets enacted. There's nothing wrong with that. We're trying to do the most good for the most amount of people possible. But if that isn't ultimately what becomes law, but it passes the meaningfulness standard, it helps us save lives, help our communities, drive down prescription drug costs, drive down the cost of the Affordable Care Act. Those are things that all of us are going to hold hands and support. And that's what I would expect out of the House Democratic Caucus.
I actually have a question for Mr. Aguilar, sir. Up including yesterday.
Hakeem can answer this.
Up including yesterday with Chairman Thompson, Mr. Schiff on Sunday on one of the shows, you all keep saying, you're communicating saying, we have not ruled out subpoenaing former Vice President Mike Pence. My question for you, sir, is why haven't you ruled him in? He's got a unique perspective from being in this building. Why is it not just off, not only not off the table, but why is it not on the table?
It isn't off the table. But what I can tell you is we've also heard amazing key testimony. I led the hearing related to pressure for the vice president. We heard incredibly meaningful testimony from people right next to the vice president the entire day. We have seen the public reporting and the interviews that he has given. We understand that he continues to say that was one day and back in time. But we understand that we also have to view it through the scope of what he will share, and is he willing to share that. But if the committee has, a decision on a conclusion that we're going to reach related to it, we'll announce it. We haven't drawn any conclusions because we continue to gather testimony, and at the appropriate time, the chairman and the vice chair will announce what's next.
Are there any climate-specific executive action that you'd like to see the president take, and do you think he should declare a national climate emergency, like I know a lot of your colleagues have called for in the wake of Senator Manchin saying he won't go as far as you all would like on energy and climate spending and reconciliation?
Well, I have supported and co-sponsored legislation that would call for a declaration of the climate crisis as a national emergency. To the extent that that's action that the president may be contemplating, I'm unaware of that, but I certainly support the legislative effort to do so. I think both in terms of economics, the climate crisis is something that we have to address with the fierce urgency of now. The military has continued to say it's the #1 national security challenge that we confront, the climate crisis and the disruption that it will cause all across the world and the geopolitical implications of that. And then obviously in terms of the health and safety and well-being of the continued intensity of extreme weather events, the climate crisis is something that we should address urgently. Jack.
Chairman, thank you. You and Mr. Aguilar both talked about the CHIPS bill here and saying, okay, you said that the conference committee is proceeding. It seems as though the conference committee is effectively over. If they're trying to put a bill together next door here to drop in just a CHIPS-only portion and maybe some other things here, how do you go back to your members, though, and say, look, we got rolled again. This is what we have to deal with in the Senate here. I talked to a number of members. On Friday who said we should stick with the House bill. They like the trade provisions.
Well, we have two members here who can speak for themselves, and I'm going to yield to them. I would disagree with the characterization of us being rolled. If the House doesn't act, and we always act, we basically laid a foundation for the Senate to do its job. And even if what they ultimately come up with is short of what we've done, in the absence of the House acting, often nothing would occur. That, in fact, is the case on guns, and that, in fact, is the case in so many other areas.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. This is something that House Democrats have become very accustomed to. We do a lot of hard work. We develop the most comprehensive response to a challenge that will have the biggest impact on the lives of the American people. And then we recognize that there's a set of rules in the Senate that are going to produce a different result. But we will continue to put before the Senate the most comprehensive, the most effective response that's going to make the biggest difference in our economy, in the lives of working families, in our climate, in gun safety. We understand the reality that the Senate requires 10 Republicans to join them most occasions. And sadly, that means they're not going to do as much to help the economy or the American people or respond to gun violence. But if it were not for the House action on many of these issues, I don't think we'd see any Senate action. We're trying to shape the final outcome of a bill and have the biggest, most impactful, most significant response to the challenge. That's what the Democrats do. We've become accustomed to, unfortunately, we don't just get what we want. We have to go through a legislative process, and that requires 10 Republicans in the Senate. But don't underestimate when people say, like, how do you, reconcile with not getting everything you want? Because we recognize the rules in the Senate are different. We're going to continue to present and fight for and pass the best piece of legislation we can on behalf of the American people. And then it's on the Senate to decide what they're going to do with it. But I'm very proud to be part of that effort. We have to keep making our case by sending the gold standard on every one of these issues to the United States Senate.
Kathy?
All I can add is that, as one of my colleagues recently said to me, this is what it means to govern, and governing is hard. And if we can get important things done for the American people, things that help the people in my district, I'm happy to be part of this governing process.
Last question. In the back, yeah.
Two quick questions, one for the Vice Chair, one for you. Mr. Vice Chair, just with respect to the committee, obviously Chairman Benny Thompson revealed that he has COVID and he's instructed the committee to move forward. But do you think that will have any impact on Thursday's hearing? And also, can you confirm if the committee has received those text messages yet from the Secret Service?
I can't confirm any evidence that we have in our possession. Look, I want Chairman Thompson in every meeting, in every room, not just related to January 6th. He's a proven leader who is helpful in every regard, and just his style and his leadership qualities are great in every room, as the chairman and I know. But look, we're going to continue forward. That's what he's asked, and that's what we'll do. We'll continue to refine the script and make sure that the hearing goes off without a hitch. That's what we plan to do under the leadership of Adam Kinzinger and Elaine Luria. Will guide the hearing forward.
And then just very quickly, Mr. Chair, this is just a procedural question. With respect to whatever comes back from the Senate on this slimmed down reconciliation package, do you anticipate the House is going to have to come back in August if it clears the Senate to vote on it?
That's a Steny Hoyer question. That's above my pay grade. Thank you, everybody. All right.
Thank you.
That was 10:39. Last question.